Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Lucas here. Thanks so much for checking out my video. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm really excited because I'm going to be presenting to you a really awesome new vocal template that I've made in Ableton. And it's a little early in the morning here in LA. It's a little cold, so I'm kind of just warming up, got a cup of coffee. I hope you guys are all doing well. I'm going to jump right into this. So this video is kind of impromptu, but I just made this template because I wanted to improve some of my routing and all that, and I feel like I really made some progress in Ableton, and it's actually taken me quite a long time to figure out some of these things. So I really hope that this template is useful to you, and I hope that I can explain some things that maybe will help you understand how Ableton works a little bit better. So just a little bit of background. I've worked as an engineer for quite a while, and I've used Pro Tools a lot for that, and I've also used Ableton kind of alongside for different things like music production, making beats and things like that. But I've kind of figured out a workflow in Ableton, and I sort of feel like I'm really catching up to what I could do in Pro Tools as far as like tracking and things like that. So this is kind of where this template came from. I'm going to walk you through everything, but just a couple quick disclaimers. Number one, I am trying to sell you something in this video, which is unusual, but you can buy the whole template for $5 on my website if you're too lazy to follow through this and set it up from scratch. If you don't have the money or you don't want to spend any money, that's cool too. You just have to hang out with me for this video and make the template from scratch, which I'm going to walk you through in a sec. The third disclaimer is that this template does use third-party plugins. I'm going to show you exactly which ones, but when you load it on your computer, you're going to have to remove them and put whichever plugins you want to use or whichever plugins you have for those particular things. But I'll walk you through in great detail how to do that. I'll also walk you through how to set this up for Apollo system if you're using Universal Audio. And likewise, I'll also walk you through setting this up if you just want to monitor right in Ableton. So either way, I got you covered. I'm going to do this video as quickly as possible. So this is not going to be like a beginner Ableton tutorial. I'm going to move pretty quickly. So I'd recommend this more for like intermediate advanced users that are really trying to track good quality vocals. This template is specifically for recording vocals. So anything else that you want to be doing here, you're going to have to set that up on your own, and that could be really awesome too if you want to set this up for like a full production or whatever it is you want to do mixing. But what I'm concerned with here is just tracking vocals. So that's what this template is set up for. So I'm going to jump right into it right now. So first of all, before we even do anything, let's just check out settings real quick. Inputs. I have my main vocal mic connected to input 1. That's my Avalon. So just double check that everything's right here. If you're tracking vocals in and monitoring in Ableton and not using your direct monitoring in your interface like Apollo console, then we're going to want to set this to 128. This overall latency is just basically an indicator of how much latency you have. I actually have a decent amount because I'm using two interfaces at the same time. But if you're using Apollo or any other interface that has direct monitoring, then you can kind of set this to whatever you want. You can also use a bunch more plugins too, because you're not going to be monitoring Ableton, so you're going to be getting less latency. When you load up this template on your computer, so obviously you're just going to download it. You can double click it, it'll open up Ableton. You can also move it into a folder of your choosing, but that doesn't really matter because you're going to have to save it as anyway, because you're going to need to make some adjustments to it to suit your particular workflow. The template's not going to look exactly like this. I actually have it set to 90 BPM, and there's obviously going to be no audio in it, but what I did is I imported a vocal from a recent session that we can use as dummy audio. So I'm going to move this around to the different tracks and make sure it sounds good and give you kind of an idea of what it sounds like when you're recording vocals with a proper level. So that's why there's audio here. Obviously you're not going to see that. And first things first, let me just show you how this is all set up. So I'll go through the vocal structure. Every track is named very specifically to make it as easy as possible to bounce stems and to share stems as well. If you send stems to like a mix engineer or whatever, we want everything named perfectly in the session, so you have to do the least amount of work, organizational work afterwards on the folders and stuff like that before sending it out. So I've really thought this through. So all the vocals are routed through acapella. So when you bounce this out, it's going to say acapella, and that's going to have all the effects, delays, chorus, all the effects that the vocals are going through are run through the acapella. Then we have three main groups. We have lead vocals, which are processed completely differently than background vocals. So this is a key thing that I kind of messed up for years. I would have all my vocals just kind of routed through one bus. We want our lead vocals to be distinctly different and through a different chain than the background vocals, because your vocals get kind of all bunched up through like a compressor or whatever you might have on that one chain if you have done it that way. and it makes a lot of sense to do background vocals separately. On acapella, all I have is utility. I'm a huge fan of utility. If you need to make any volume adjustments or whatever you need to do, you can use this here and not have to automate this channel. So that's really important. On lead vocals, we have limiter, which is Renaissance Axe, and Kush Audio Bliss. This is an EQ, limiter, and saturator built into one plugin. So if you don't have these plugins, it's totally fine. Just put a limiter on here and an EQ if you want. I've skipped multi-banding because it's just going to take up way too much CPU for tracking, but if you're mixing, you may want to put a multi-band on there. You may want to put a bunch of different effects on here, but this is pretty slim and trim because if I'm tracking, I don't want a bunch of bloated software crashing my computer. So that's lead vocals chain. Now, all the vocal tracks have their individual channels, so this is how I named these. And keep in mind, all these are input 1, so you want to make sure your routing's right for whatever your mic input is for your vocals. So we have demo vocals, super important. So I always have a track for demo vocals when I'm doing a tracking session, because sometimes the artist just shows up and just starts singing random stuff. You don't know if it's the verse or whatever it is, so we just record like the whole song basically as a demo, and then you can go back and track each section separately. Super important to have each section separate for EQing purposes. So we have verse 1 vocal, verse 2 vocal, pre-chorus vocal. Notice how every track has vocal in the word, so that if I send stems to someone, there's no confusion about what this is. If it just says verse 2, it's no good because they don't know. I mean, you could assume it's verse 2 vocals, but still, like I might have verse 2 guitar or arpeggio or whatever. So we want to be very specific naming all these things. If you do something different like panned vocals or whatever, just label it pre-vocal left, pre-vocal right, and so on. So we have pre-vocal, hook vocal, and then bridge vocal. You could have many more tracks, but I felt like for me, this is as many as I need, otherwise it's just unnecessary. Each track on these lead vocals has an identical chain. So the first thing we have is EQ8, which is just trimming low mids. You may want to redo that depending on the type of music that you're working on, but for me, this is perfect. And then the next thing is we have RVox, which you may or may not want to use, but for tracking vocals, this is perfect for me because it adds a lot of gain so the singer really can hear themselves clearly, and it has minimal amount of knobs to dial in, so we're just compressing a bit and it just adds a bunch of gain. There's not a lot of like compression bells and whistles. You may want to replace this with RComp. You could use stock Ableton glue compressor, just whatever vocal compressor you want to use, 1176. A TubeTech CL1B style compressor, long list of different ones. But just use something that's stable on your system that's not going to crash and that's not too complicated to set up that you can just copy over. So that's very basic vocal channel strip that I have for all of these leads. So here's an example of what the lead vocal sounds like with one of my artists, Cam, singing. Just so you get an idea, this is just through the demo vocals track, but they all sound identical, and I'm going to go through the returns in one sec because that's the complicated part.
And still I can't see, break me down, then rearrange me, sleepy thoughts from the ghost she's hiding.
So we have a bunch of ambiances and stuff, which I'm going to get into in a second. Super important for tracking vocals. Not every vocalist will want that, but in my experience, most vocals want ambience because it's just very unnatural to sing totally dry through the mic. So if you're trying to catch a vibe with a new artist or whatever it is, it just kind of helps to have all those delays and things preset. So on my background vocal, I'm actually kind of going top down, so I'm doing the bus effects first and then doing the channels, just to be clear about that. So on the background vocals bus, I chose to use this TubeTech. This is basically just a channel strip, so we have EQ and compression. So there's a couple things that you could put on here if you don't have this plugin or if you want to use something else. You could basically go with something really similar to lead vocals, but I wanted to keep it different. So essentially what I'm doing with the EQ here is I'm scooping some mids to leave a lot of space for the leads. I'm boosting some high end to make sure that it's crispy, or just to make sure that it's like pretty, like, because I like really airy, breathy background vocals and harmonies, so I have the top end boosted at 16K here. We have a dip in the mids, and I'm compressing it, not quite as heavily or aggressively as the lead vocals, but just enough to kind of level out all the different words and intricacies of the background vocal. So that's on the channel. There's a number of things that you could do here. So if you want to throw an EQ, if you're mixing, you could throw a multi-band on there, compression, limiting, saturation, whatever your flavor, you can definitely make it your own. And then here's at the channel level. So here's my naming real quick. So we have verse, vocal harmony. So I'm very specific about making sure I designate what section it's for, because there may be background vocals for the verse, for the chorus, and I want to know exactly what it is, especially if I'm printing out stems and sending them out. Number two is that it needs to say vocal in all of the tracks so that no one's confused about what instrument it is. And then number three is the part. So we have harmonies, ad-libs. Depending on the kind of music you're working on, you might want to name it like ins and outs, background vocals, ad-libs, effect vocals, whatever it is that you need to do. But for me, I just have verse vocal harmony, verse vocal ad-lib, pre-vocal harmony, and so on and so forth. So we have ad-libs and harmonies for every section. That's what I find myself recording most often. I like to make sure there's a distinct harmony for certain parts, and then just ad-libs that I can run through a bunch of effects. So these background vocals are quite a bit more wet than the leads, and they're a little bit less aggressively compressed overall than the leads. And let me just go over the channel strip. This is actually pretty much the same as the leads. So we have this same EQ that's only removing low mids. And then we have our Vox that's compressing gently and boosting a bunch of levels so the vocalists can hear themselves clearly. Once again, just to be super clear, this isn't really like a mixing template or anything. So I have these vocals running very hot. The singer just always wants to hear themselves very clearly. So what I would do is if there was an instrumental or a beat or, a bunch of stems of a track that we're recording over, just put those in a group and just turn that down and just have the vocals very, very loud so the singer isn't ever complaining, oh, I can't hear myself, any of that, because that's a good way of making them upset. And then so that's that for the channels. Here's what this sounds like.
And still I can't see, break me down, then rearrange me, sleepy thoughts from the ghost she's hiding.
So it's pretty wet on delays. We could probably go crazier with reverb and stuff like that, but there's plenty of headroom, so you can do that as you wish. So those are the background vocal tracks. Now we're going to get into the meat of this video, which is the part that I'm most excited about, is doing these effects. So I have gone crazy trying to figure this out. So I'm really happy to present this to you. This might be confusing. It's going to be the most confusing part of the video, but don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it. You might not want to do it this way, which is totally fine, but you can do it any way you want. But this is how I feel like having the ultimate vocal recording setup, as similar to how it would be in Pro Tools for ultimate control, best stemming options, best sonics. This is how I'm doing it. I created all of these returns. So to create a return, you can right click and hit insert return track, or we can do the key command here. So what I did is I created a return for every possible thing that I feel like I may need for recording vocals. So we have parallel compression. So that just compresses everything on the side, which is a really nice effect. We have reverb, of course. Now I have a delay for every possible subdivision that I may want. So we have eighth note delay, quarter note delay, and half note delay. And my quarter note delay is actually a ping pong. It doesn't have to be that way. You can have mono delays, stereo delays, whatever it is. And on each of these delay tracks, also, you don't necessarily just have to have delay. You can do delay into reverb, into chorus, or delay into flanger, into reverb, delay into saturation, whatever it is you want. So I'll walk you through that in a second. And then lastly, this last track, super important, is chorus effect. So it's a detuning effect. I used to actually have that just on the buses, but I realized it was kind of a CPU hog, and it makes more sense just to route it through a return. That way you can, if you're sending it out for mixing, they have all those like modulation and delay effects in separate tracks and not baked into the acapella. So the acapella is going to have everything, but not baked into these lead tracks. So these lead tracks are just going to have the vocals with the EQ and compression, so like a process vocal, and then all of your effects are going to be routed to this vocal effects channel, and that's kind of what took me so long to figure out. So basically, the main thing that I have to explain here that's the most confusing, these returns are actually just dummy returns. There's no effects, there's nothing on here. So what I did was I created them, and I actually routed them to tracks. So I created corresponding tracks for comp, reverb, delays, and chorus, and routed each one at a time to those tracks. You have to disable all these sends, so they should be grayed out here for every single one. This is super important. These all need to be disabled. So all these are routed corresponding. There's no effects on here. These are dummy sends, so we can actually just hide them. Or sorry, dummy returns, technically. All those dummy returns, so like for example, your lead vocal is routed through all 6 of those however you want to mix it. So the one thing is you do have to remember this is comp, reverb, eighth delay, quarter delay, half note delay, and then chorus. You just memorize that. And then it gets sent through those dummy returns and then sent back through here. So the main thing that I was really struggling to figure out in Ableton was that I really wanted all of my vocal effects to be mixed into the acapella. So whatever effects that you choose to put on the acapella, if you want to like compress all the vocals or do whatever, we want those effects to be running through that channel as well, not just running directly to the master. So that can sound really weird in my opinion to have all of the effects going straight to the master and skipping the vocal group. Like for example, if you put an EQ or a filter or something on all the vocals, it won't touch the effects returns, which was a major problem I had in Ableton, and that's not a problem in Pro Tools. Here is where you put the effects. All these tracks, you have to set them to in, and we set them to vote. This should automatically route it to this group if you create the tracks and then put a group, but these are all going to vocal effects. In, so they're blue. I put them all at -8 dB, so you have some headroom. You can crank them or turn them down if you want. So in vocal comp, I'm using this arouser plugin, so it's like a distressor. You can use whatever super aggressive compressor you want. So we want a bunch of saturation and a bunch of compression with really fast attack. So that's that one. Next is reverb. We're using Valhalla Vintage Verb. You can use 70s mode or 80s mode. I just have it on here. A bunch of pre-delay, dial in the EQ, and then I put another EQ after here, after the plugin over here, so you can do whatever you want on the EQ. You could compress this. You could do a number of creative things. So that's our reverb. Here's our 1/8 delay. I'm also using Valhalla for that. So we're in tape mode. Make sure these mix knobs are at 100%. EQ is not really doing much here, but you can put an EQ after it if you want. Just make sure it's set to eighth. You could do ping pong, change the feedback, whatever it is you need. Same thing, here's our quarter delay. This one's in ping pong mode, and I also have an EQ here. The EQ is engaged here too. So some of the delays have less EQ, some of them have more. You can add a saturator, you can put reverb on the delay, you could put chorus effects on the delay, you could put flanger. There's a lot of things you can do to the delay, so it's very flexible here. Even just the Ableton saturator would sound really cool over these. And here is the half delay. This is a mono half note delay. And lastly, here's the chorus I'm using. This is my secret weapon here, the Reason Rack Quartet Chorus Ensemble is unreal. This is my favorite chorus plugin by far. If you have any other chorus plugins that you really like, let me know, because I'm trying to find more. But I know you can just use like Echo Boy or delay, but for some reason this one just sounds really cool. I want to find more like it. The dry wet is all the way up, and everything's at -8 dB. So this is the vocal effects chain. So this is really nice when it prints down stems. So like when you go to Shift Command R and do all individual tracks as wave stems, what happens is all these print out individually, and you get all the vocal effects baked into this group. So I think that's super handy. Now, the last thing for this video that I'm going to explain is how do you set this up for tracking using your direct monitoring from Apollo console. So it's really simple. Actually, the only thing you need to do is just select all these tracks and switch it to off, so that we're not monitoring anymore in Ableton. And you would go to console and unmute your, I'm clipping. You would unmute your lead vocal channel, whatever that may be. So I have everything muted except for this because I'm recording this video. So you could monitor in here, set up whatever effects you want. So you're definitely going to want compression, EQ, and probably set up some sends as well with reverb and delay, or you can just put it on directly either way. So the key thing is you need to have all these off. But this is set up to monitor directly in Ableton. That is why I also have the buffer size to 128. But if you're monitoring in Apollo console, you can set this lower. You can put a bunch of effects on the master, do whatever, and you're still going to have really low latency. I'm going to actually just do a quick sound demo of all these effects real quick before I conclude this video. You can see this sounds a little bit better by switching to mixer mode here. I don't have anything on the master, so I'm leaving that open for you guys. Some people, you may or may not want to have effects on the master, and I have minimal effects on the acapella, literally just this utility to change the levels. I would actually recommend putting utility on all of the groups. That way, if you do automation, it's not baked into the mixer. So here's just a quick, we're going to do like a run through of all the vocal effects, and I'll show you what this sounds like when you solo things so you can see how the behavior works. This is very different than only using the returns. By the way, if you choose to do that, actually that's totally fine. So you would just pretty much skip setting up this whole vocal effects area, and you would just have all your vocal effects directly on these channels and not use them as dummies. So that's kind of the more intermediate way of doing this. So there would be effects on each of these, and the routing would be totally normal for all of these. You wouldn't be routing it back into the mixer. And the last thing, one other thing I need to mention, so if you do decide to use this complicated routing method, you absolutely 100% have to, this is actually one of the most important things from the video, you absolutely have to right click and disable all these sends for every single group. So you cannot use the sends on anything other than the tracks that you're recording. So all the tracks that you're recording have sends enabled, but any group, so like lead vocals, background vocals, vocal effects, all of these sends are grayed out and disabled. So I'm just going to double check this done. Grayed out, lead vocals grayed out, and also acapella grayed out. If any of these are enabled, you're going to have latency problems and it's not going to work. It's literally one of the most important things in this video. It took me years to figure this out. Super important. So disable all the sends. So you want to create these sends first, and then once you have exactly the number that you need, disable them. If you keep creating more, it's going to enable them over here and you're going to have latency problems. Basically, the issue is that if you have any of these sends enabled, it's going to be doing delay compensation. It's going to mess up latency for parallel effects. So last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to run you through the vocal effects here, just so we can hear them. So we have this audio running through. Here's our parallel comp.
And still I can't see.
Here's our vocal reverb. Here's our 8th delay.
And still I can't see.
Here's our quarter delay. Ooh, oh, there we are. The half delay we're actually not using, so I'm just going to turn that on here.
And still I can't see.
And here's chorus.
And still I can't.
So all the vocal effects together.
And still I can't see. Break me down.
So actually we don't need all these delays, so I'm going to get rid of the half delay.
And still I can't see. Break me down.
So that's just the effects. So that's what's super cool about this. You can literally solo only the sends. And now I'm going to solo the whole acapella. Or actually, there's nothing else playing in this project, but here's the whole acapella.
And still I can't see.
So you see that if I do just vocal effects?
And still I can't see.
And here's the whole thing.
And still I can't see.
I went through all the specific plugins that are in the template. So if you don't have those, you're just going to have to delete them and replace them with the limiters and processing plugins of your choice. So do that and then save it as a template. When you're done with it, all you have to do is hit File and click Save Live Set as a template, and then it goes over here. And the cool thing about these as well is you can just grab individual tracks and groups from these and drag them into your session. So you don't even have to start with the template. So I do that a lot. The only thing is that the returns are going to be messed up. So I would actually recommend starting with this. If you have a template that has a bunch of returns, start with it and then start adding stuff to it. If, let's say I drag this group from this other template here, it will not bring over any sends and return effects. It's only going to bring the group by itself. So here, let me just show you that. I'm dragging this drums template. This drums template should have sends and returns, but I'm just dragging it in and it saves the routing. Like for example, it has this routed to my vocal comp, but that's not how it's supposed to be. So it's really important you make sure you start with the template that has all the returns that you're going to need. And if you drag these in, you need to be careful to fix these sends and returns, because this is not right. So I hope that was helpful. Again, my name's Lucas. Check out my website for the downloads. I have a bunch of free downloads on there too, so just go check it out either way. Even if you don't want to buy anything, there's free channel strips and different things. I'm going to be posting like sample packs on there too. Sorry this video is a little long. I hope you guys are doing great. Let me know if this was helpful, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.